The sound of a child's faint whimper echoed through the courtroom just as the sunlight slipped through the tall windows, illuminating the face of a man whose world had been falling apart piece by piece. Marlon Creed, a worn-out single father with shadows under his eyes and a day-old stubble across his jaw, stood trembling beside the defendant's table. He had not slept in 2 nights. His clothes were clean but clearly cheap, the kind a person buys after selling almost everything they own just to keep going. As he gently placed his daughter's broken toy in his pocket, the courtroom spectators exchanged smirks, nudging each other as though the appearance of this exhausted man was already the punchline to a cruel joke. But the most heartbreaking part was the way his 8-year-old daughter, Leora, watched silently from a corner bench, clutching the sleeves of her faded yellow jacket like she was afraid someone might take even that from her. If you believe that hope, compassion, and second chances can change a life, Ripple of Love family, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support truly keeps these stories alive. The judge adjusted her glasses, clearly impatient, while the opposing attorney's smirk broadened into the kind one makes when they think the game is already won. Yet the truth behind Marlon's shaking hands was far deeper than anyone in that courtroom could imagine. Only hours ago, he had stood in the cramped kitchen of the small government housing unit he now lived in, staring at a stack of unpaid bills, eviction notices, and the faded photograph of his late wife. Mira had passed away 3 years earlier after a sudden illness, and ever since, life felt like a never-ending storm that kept sweeping Marlon off his feet. His jobs never lasted long, not because he didn't work hard, but because he never had anyone to stay with Leora when emergency shifts called him in. Every time he lost a job, it pushed them closer to the edge. Today's hearing was supposed to determine whether Marlon was still fit to keep custody of Leora. It was a battle he never wanted but was forced into after Myra's estranged mother resurfaced, filing a petition claiming he could no longer provide stability. Marlon knew he wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. He cried more than he ever admitted. He sometimes felt like he was raising his child while drowning in his own grief. But he loved Leora more than anything, and love was the one thing he had never once failed to give. The courtroom air felt thick, muggy even, like the weight of the sunlight pushing through the windows pressed down on everyone inside. The polished wooden benches reflected a warm golden glow that contrasted sharply with the cold expressions of the people who doubted him. Outside, through the tall windows, birds hopped along the courthouse steps as though the world outside was oblivious to the breaking of one man's spirit inside. The judge called Marlon to speak, and the rustle of papers, suppressed laughter, and the tapping of heels on the marble floor filled the room with a strange tension. The opposing lawyer leaned back smugly, arms folded, as though he already knew that Marlon's shaky voice would be the final nail in his own case. Leora's grandmother sat stiffly on the other side of the courtroom, her lips pursed in an expression that mirrored silent judgment, not grief, not nostalgia, only cold certainty. Marlon took a breath that wavered halfway into his lungs. For a moment, he felt the dissolve of all his efforts, the collapse of everything he had held up for years. His mind flashed back to the nights he walked miles to pick up Leora after school because the bus pass had expired. The days he skipped meals just so she wouldn't go hungry. The mornings he braided her hair with trembling fingers while reciting encouraging words he barely believed himself. The laughter she brought him. The tears she wiped from his cheeks. The way she once said, "Daddy, you're my whole world, even if the world doesn't see you." A smirk rose from somewhere behind him, and he felt it like a thorn pushed straight into his chest. The soft sound of mockery rippled through the spectators. To them, he was the desperate father who would soon lose everything. To them, he was a man whose voice would break and fall apart. But when Marlon finally looked up, something shifted in his eyes, not strength, but a fragile kind of courage that grows only from suffering that no one else witnessed. He spoke, not loudly, but with a clarity so raw that every smirk in the room froze. He didn't deliver legal arguments. He didn't list achievements. Instead, he opened the corners of his heart in a way no one expected. He spoke of Myra's dreams for their daughter, of how her laughter saved him from the emptiness of losing his wife, of how love was the only reason he woke up every morning despite the weight of life crushing him daily. He admitted his failures. He confessed his fears. He described how each job he lost wasn't a sign of irresponsibility but a choice of leaving everything behind just to be present for Leora when she needed him most. He said that he didn't have wealth or influence or flawless stability, but he had a promise to raise Leora with the values her mother dreamed of. He explained that the broken toy in his pocket was the last birthday gift Mira had ever given their daughter, something he fixed every time it cracked, because keeping it alive felt like keeping Mira alive too. And as he spoke, the room shifted. The judge lowered her pen. The spectators' smirks faded. Even the opposing attorney leaned forward, his expression losing confidence. Leora's grandmother blinked with a sudden tremor in her eyes. The courtroom fell silent, not because of the eloquence of his words, but because everyone could feel the truth in his trembling voice. The sun moved slowly across the marble floor, warming the space near Marlon's feet, as if even the daylight chose to stand beside him. The judge asked the final questions. Marlon answered with sincerity, vulnerability, and a quiet strength that had been buried beneath 3 years of grief, exhaustion, and relentless struggle. His honesty painted him not as a failing father but as a man who refused to stop fighting, even when the world already counted him out. As the testimony closed, the judge announced a brief recess so she could review the details before giving her decision. People gathered their belongings, whispered among themselves, and moved toward the hallway. Marlon sat on a bench outside the courtroom, his hands clasped so tightly they had gone pale. Leora climbed onto his lap and rested her head on his chest. He was shaking, not from fear of losing her, but from the exhaustion of spending every day fighting battles most people never saw. Sunlight glowed through the hallway windows, throwing warm patterns across the cold stone floor. It made Leora look like she was wrapped in a soft halo, her hair catching the light in delicate strands. Marlon closed his eyes, breathing her in, wishing he could freeze this moment, the small warmth of her presence, the soft hum of her breath, the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, things would turn around. Moments later, they were called back in. The judge looked down at the papers with an expression impossible to read. Marlon's pulse quickened. The room held its breath. Leora squeezed his hand. Before I reveal what happened next, Ripple of Love family, if this story has touched you even a little, please support it by liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting. Your engagement truly keeps these heartfelt stories going and reaching more people. The judge finally looked up. Her voice was steady, controlled, but softer than before. She acknowledged that stability was important, but so was emotional truth. She said that parenting wasn't measured only by income or circumstances, but by the unwavering commitment of a heart that refuses to give up on a child. She recognized that Marlon had carried grief, poverty, and loneliness on his back while still managing to nurture Leora with love so evident it radiated throughout the courtroom. She granted Marlon full custody, with supportive resources to stabilize his situation. A soft gasp spread across the room. Leora's grandmother lowered her head, not in defeat, but in quiet realization. Even she could no longer deny what she had witnessed, the undeniable bond between father and daughter. Tears slipped down Marlon's cheeks as he lifted Leora into his arms, holding her with a relief so overwhelming he nearly collapsed. She wrapped her small arms around his neck, whispering that they would be okay now. And in that moment, the sunlight from the windows illuminated them like a blessing, as if the universe had finally paused to give them the peace they had desperately earned. Before the final emotional closing, Ripple of Love viewers, please comment below, your thoughts truly mean the world. In the end, as they walked out of the courthouse hand in hand, Marlon felt something he hadn't felt in years, not victory, not pride, but healing. The weight on his shoulders didn't disappear, but for once, he wasn't buried under it. He realized that sometimes life breaks people in ways that seem beyond repair, but love has a way of stitching the broken pieces together when the world least expects it. And as he carried Leora down the courthouse steps into the warm glow of the afternoon sun, he understood that even the most stumbling souls can rise again, and even the most overlooked hearts can